she made sacrifices for duty. Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered, through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss.
Just minutes ago, Buckingham Palace dropped a bombshell that has sent shockwaves around the entire world. King Charles and Prince William made an emergency announcement about Princess Catherine that nobody could have predicted. What they just revealed is absolutely devastating, and the royal family will never be the same. The truth they've been hiding for months has finally come to light, and it's far worse than anyone imagined. What happens next will leave you speechless.
I did, yeah. I'd been carrying it around with me in my rucksack for about 3 weeks before that, and I literally would not let it go. Everywhere I went, I was keeping hold of it because I knew this thing, if it disappeared, I'd be in a lot of trouble. And yeah, because I planned it, it went fine. As you know, you'll hear a lot of horror stories about proposing and things going horribly wrong. It went really, really well, and yeah, I was really pleased that she said yes.
The scene itself was extraordinary. For an institution built on restraint and careful control of public image, the visible emotion on display marked a departure from everything the monarchy typically represents. King Charles, a man who has spent decades mastering the art of formal composure, spoke with a heaviness that reflected the personal toll this situation had taken on him and his family. Prince William stood beside his father, and those watching noted the tension in his posture, the strain visible in his face. His voice, normally steady and measured, carried an unmistakable tremor as he thanked the public for their continued support and prayers. The words spoken that day were deliberately chosen, yet they carried an emotional weight that no amount of royal training could disguise. Catherine's condition, they explained, had taken an unexpected turn. Medical teams were working tirelessly, but the path ahead remained uncertain. There were no guarantees being offered, no timeline for recovery, and no reassurances that everything would return to normal. This was a moment of profound vulnerability from a family that rarely allows the world to see beyond the carefully constructed facade of royal life. King Charles made a particularly striking comment during the address, referring to Catherine as the heart of this family. These words resonated far beyond their immediate context. They revealed not just the affection he holds for his daughter-in-law, but also an acknowledgement of her central role in the modern monarchy. Catherine has become, over the past decade, one of the most recognized and beloved figures in the royal family. Her warmth, her dedication to charitable causes, and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life have made her irreplaceable in the public eye. To hear the king describe her in such personal terms was to understand just how serious the situation had become. According to sources close to the royal family, it was actually King Charles who pushed for this level of transparency. For weeks, there had been intense discussions within palace walls about how much information should be shared with the public. Traditional palace advisors, concerned about maintaining stability and avoiding panic, had advocated for a more guarded approach. But Charles reportedly felt that the time for carefully managed silence had passed. The speculation was growing too loud, the questions too insistent, and most importantly, Catherine deserved better than to have her struggle hidden away as if it was something shameful. Within hours of the announcement, the response was overwhelming. People began gathering outside royal residences across the country. Windsor Castle, usually a place of tourists and organised tours, transformed into something resembling a vigil. Thousands of people arrived carrying flowers, candles, and handmade signs expressing their love and support. The atmosphere was one of quiet reverence rather than the usual excitement that surrounds royal events. People spoke in hushed tones, many visibly emotional, united in their concern for a woman who had always seemed so strong and vibrant. The scene was repeated at Kensington Palace, at Buckingham Palace, and at various landmarks throughout London. What struck many observers was the diversity of those who came to show their support. This was not just dedicated royal enthusiasts or older generations with traditional attachments to the monarchy. Young families brought their children. University students left their classes to light candles. People from all backgrounds, many of whom might not typically engage with royal events, felt compelled to be present in this moment of collective worry. The international response was equally swift and heartfelt. Messages began pouring in from world leaders, celebrities, healthcare workers, and ordinary citizens from dozens of countries. Social media platforms became flooded with expressions of support, personal stories about Catherine's impact, and prayers for her recovery. Many people shared their own experiences with serious illness, creating a global conversation about health, family, and resilience. The hashtag supporting Catherine trended worldwide, demonstrating just how far her influence had reached beyond British borders. News organizations around the globe interrupted their regular programming to cover the developing story. Major networks dedicated entire segments to analyzing the announcement, bringing in medical experts, royal historians, and commentators to help audiences understand the significance of what was happening. The tone across most coverage was notably respectful, with many journalists acknowledging that this situation transcended the usual dynamics of royal reporting. This was not about scandals or palace intrigue. This was about a young mother facing a serious health crisis while the entire world watched. Hospitals and medical facilities associated with the royal family suddenly found themselves surrounded by media presence. Journalists stationed themselves outside, hoping for any additional information, any update that might clarify the situation. But the palace remained firm in its position. Beyond the initial statement, there would be no further details released. The family requested privacy during this unimaginably difficult time, and for once, most media outlets seemed willing to respect those boundaries. What made this moment particularly significant was the silence that followed the announcement. In our modern age of constant updates and instant information, the absence of new details became its own story. The palace offered no timeline for recovery, no specifics about treatment plans, no carefully staged photographs meant to reassure the public that everything was under control. This silence spoke volumes. It suggested that the situation was serious enough that the usual royal machinery of image management had been set aside in favour of focusing entirely on Catherine's well-being. Royal observers and historians noted that this represented a dramatic shift in how the monarchy communicates during times of crisis. Traditionally, the royal family has maintained an almost impenetrable wall between their private lives and public duties. Health matters in particular have historically been treated with extreme discretion. But this approach was different. By speaking openly about the uncertainty, by showing genuine emotion, and by asking directly for understanding and privacy, the royal family was attempting something new. They were trying to be honest without compromising Catherine's dignity or the family's need for space to cope with what was happening. The weight of this moment was not just in what was said, but in everything that remained unspoken. The fears that parents everywhere could understand, the helplessness of watching someone you love suffer, the desperate hope that modern medicine could provide answers and solutions. These universal human experiences were suddenly at the center of a story about one of the world's most famous families. And it reminded everyone watching that titles and palaces cannot protect anyone from the fundamental vulnerabilities of human existence. As the first day after the announcement drew to a close, one thing had become unmistakably clear. Whatever had been carefully maintained as private concern had now erupted into public consciousness. A nation, and indeed much of the world, found itself holding its breath, hoping for positive news while preparing emotionally for the possibility that the outcome might be far more difficult to accept. The collective heartbreak was real, immediate, and profound. The concerns about Princess Catherine's health did not begin with the dramatic palace announcement. In reality, warning signs had been present for weeks, carefully hidden from public view, but increasingly difficult to ignore for those paying close attention. The unravelling started not with headlines or official statements, but with something far more unsettling: the complete absence of Catherine from public life. For a woman who had become synonymous with royal visibility and engagement, her sudden disappearance triggered alarm bells among royal watchers and the general public assembly. Initially, Kensington Palace had issued what seemed like a straightforward explanation. Catherine had undergone a planned abdominal surgery, and the recovery period was expected to last several weeks. The statement was clear and seemingly comprehensive, designed to address any immediate concerns while maintaining appropriate privacy around medical matters. For most royal observers, this should have been sufficient. The palace had acknowledged the situation, explained the absence, and requested space for recovery. Under normal circumstances, that would have been the end of the story. But these were not normal circumstances. Days turned into weeks, and the expected signs of recovery never materialized. There were no photographs of Prince William visiting the hospital, no carefully arranged images of flowers arriving at their residence, no updates about Catherine's progress. Even more noticeably, there was no information about whether the children had been able to see their mother, a detail that would typically be shared to reassure the public and demonstrate that everything was proceeding normally. The royal family, which usually operates with precision in managing public perception, had retreated into total silence. This silence became increasingly difficult to interpret as time went on. Royal correspondents, who typically maintain extensive networks of palace contacts, found themselves unable to obtain even the most basic updates. The usual channels of communication had gone completely quiet. Photographers who routinely stake out royal locations found themselves with nothing to capture. Even Catherine's regular medical team, professionals who had worked with the royal family for years, remained impossibly tight-lipped when approached for comment. The information vacuum was absolute, and it was deeply unsettling. The situation took on new dimensions when Prince William began cancelling scheduled appearances. On multiple occasions, he was expected to attend charity galas, official engagements, and ceremonial functions, only to withdraw at the last minute with minimal explanation. These cancellations were handled differently than typical royal schedule changes. There was no rescheduling, no detailed reasoning provided, no attempt to manage the optics of his absence. He simply disappeared from public view, and the palace offered only the vaguest acknowledgements that circumstances required changes to his calendar. When William did eventually appear at public events, his appearance told its own story. Those who had followed his public life for years noted the exhaustion etched into his face. The usual energy and engagement that characterized his interactions seemed diminished. He appeared distracted going through the motions of his royal duties, but clearly preoccupied with matters far more pressing than ribbon cuttings or ceremonial speeches. Close observers noted the darkness under his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes anymore. Palace insiders, speaking on condition of anonymity, began providing fragments of information that only deepened the mystery. One aide reportedly mentioned unexpected complications during a private conversation that was overheard at an official event. Another source suggested that the palace was working overtime to contain what they described as fallout, though what exactly that meant remained unclear. These snippets of information, while impossible to verify, fed into a growing narrative that something had gone seriously wrong with what was supposed to be a routine recovery. The palace continued to maintain its official position throughout this period. Privacy was paramount, they insisted. Catherine needed space to heal, and the family required time away from public scrutiny to support her through this difficult period. These statements were not inherently unreasonable. Medical privacy is a fundamental right, and the royal family deserves the same consideration as any other family dealing with health challenges. But as the weeks stretched on with no visible progress, privacy began to look less like a reasonable request and more like a cover for something far more serious. Then came the leak that changed everything. A staff member at the London clinic, speaking anonymously to a foreign journalist, provided a single chilling sentence that would reverberate through media coverage for weeks to come. The situation, this source claimed, was worse than the palace was acknowledging publicly. That one sentence, carefully worded to avoid legal liability but clear enough in its implications, spread through news outlets and social media like wildfire. Though the palace refused to comment directly on what they characterized as unsubstantiated rumors, the damage to their carefully controlled narrative was immediate and significant. Mainstream media organizations, which had largely respected the palace's requests for privacy up to that point, began asking harder questions. Why had there been no recovery photographs, even generic ones that showed no medical details? Why had William become virtually invisible when his wife presumably needed support? Why had Catherine, whose entire public identity was built around visibility, warmth, and connection with the public, vanished so completely that it was as if she had never existed? These questions, once whispered in royal commentary circles, now appeared in major newspapers and television broadcasts. Behind the secure walls of Windsor Castle and within the private corridors of Kensington Palace, the reality was far grimmer than anything being discussed publicly. Those close to the situation understood that this was no longer about managing a temporary absence or orchestrating a carefully timed return to public duties. Something fundamental had shifted in Catherine's condition, something that defied the optimistic projections that had been offered in those early statements about planned surgery and expected recovery times. Prince William found himself in an impossible position during these weeks. He was simultaneously a concerned husband, desperate for his wife's recovery, a father trying to maintain normalcy for 3 young children who didn't fully understand why their mother was absent, and a future king expected to maintain composure and continue fulfilling his royal obligations. Friends described him during this period as barely sleeping, barely eating, consumed by worry that he could share with almost no one outside the immediate family. The pressure of maintaining the public facade while dealing with private terror was taking a visible toll. The arguments behind palace doors became increasingly heated as different factions debated the appropriate response. Traditional advisors, steeped in decades of palace protocol, argued that maintaining discretion was essential for stability. They worried that any admission of serious complications would trigger panic, destabilize public confidence in the monarchy, and create a media circus that would only make the situation more difficult for Catherine and her family. Their instincts were to protect, to shield, to maintain the carefully constructed image of royal strength and permanence. But William was no longer listening to these arguments. His patience with palace protocol had reached its breaking point. This was not about public relations or institutional stability. This was about the woman he loved, the mother of his children, and he could no longer stomach the idea of hiding her struggle as if it was something shameful. According to sources familiar with the situation, he sent a private email to his father with a subject line that captured his frustration perfectly. "She deserves more than silence." That email, which would later leak to the media through channels that were never fully identified, represented a turning point. William was no longer willing to play by the rules that had governed royal crisis management for generations. He began speaking more directly with select journalists, carefully offering hints and context that the official palace statements refused to provide. His frustration became visible in his body language, in the way he walked away from meetings without explanation, in his refusal to participate in the carefully orchestrated theatre of royal normalcy. Then, in mid-March, the situation deteriorated sharply. Catherine's condition took what insiders described as a sudden and severe turn. Medical protocols changed dramatically. Treatment approaches were intensified. The team of doctors attending to her expanded to include specialists who had not previously been involved. Within the palace's inner circle, a cold realization settled over everyone involved. This was not a temporary setback in an otherwise manageable recovery. This was something far more serious, something that threatened not just Catherine's health, but potentially her life. The palace's instinct to shield and protect, so deeply ingrained in centuries of royal tradition, had now become its greatest vulnerability. By hiding the truth for so long, by maintaining the fiction that everything was proceeding according to plan, they had backed themselves into a corner. The gap between official statements and reality had grown so wide that any admission of the truth would inevitably raise questions about why the deception had been maintained for so long. And yet continuing to hide the reality was no longer possible. The truth was too big, too serious, and too immediate to keep locked away behind palace walls. The crisis reached a breaking point when King Charles made a decision that stunned even his closest advisors. For a man who had spent his entire life learning the delicate art of royal restraint, who had been trained from childhood to separate personal feelings from public duty, what happened next represented a complete departure from everything the monarchy had traditionally stood for. During a tense gathering at Clarence House, with senior advisors present to discuss the ongoing management of Catherine's situation, Charles reportedly stood up, slammed his hand on the table, and declared that the time for hiding had ended. The world, he insisted, needed to know what Catherine was truly fighting. This moment marked a fundamental shift in how the royal family would approach the crisis. Charles had watched from a distance as the situation spiraled, as his son suffered in silence, and as the institution he now led buried itself deeper in secrecy that was becoming impossible to maintain. He had listened to advisors explain why transparency would be dangerous, why the public needed to be protected from difficult truths, why the monarchy's stability depended on maintaining a veneer of control. But something had changed in Charles, something that made all those carefully reasoned arguments suddenly seem hollow and irrelevant. The catalyst for this transformation came during a private visit to Adelaide Cottage, where Catherine was staying during her recovery. Sources close to the family say that Charles spent only 15 minutes at her bedside, but those 15 minutes fundamentally altered his perspective. For a man who had mastered the art of emotional distance, who had learned to view situations through the lens of institutional necessity rather than personal feeling, what he witnessed that day broke through every defense he had carefully constructed over decades. When he left Windsor that evening, people who saw him described a man visibly shaken, his hands trembling, his face drained of colour. What Charles had seen was not a princess making steady progress toward recovery. He had seen a young mother fighting a battle that was far from won, her strength diminished, her future uncertain. He had seen his son's wife, a woman who had revitalized the monarchy's public image, reduced to a fragile figure that bore little resemblance to the vibrant person the world knew. And perhaps most significantly, he had been forced to confront the reality that all the palace protocols and carefully managed statements in the world could not change what was actually happening behind closed doors. The power struggle that erupted following Charles's declaration was intense and immediate. Queen Camilla, drawing on her years of experience navigating the complex dynamics of royal life, attempted to counsel caution. She suggested that a carefully worded update could satisfy public curiosity without revealing the full extent of Catherine's condition. Her approach was measured and strategic, rooted in the traditional palace method of giving just enough information to manage the narrative without losing control of it. But Charles would not be persuaded. His response, according to those present, was firm and final. This was no longer about managing optics or controlling narratives. This was about treating Catherine with the dignity and honesty she deserved. For the first time since ascending to the throne, Charles overruled every senior advisor in the room. These were people who had served the royal family for decades, who understood the intricate mechanisms of palace communications, who had successfully managed numerous royal crises over the years. Their expertise and judgment had always been respected, even when difficult decisions needed to be made. But on this occasion, their king was not interested in their carefully crafted strategies. He demanded complete transparency, insisting that the public be told the truth, regardless of how difficult that truth might be to hear. This decision sent shockwaves through the palace establishment. Some advisors feared that full disclosure would trigger widespread panic, that the public would lose faith in the monarchy's stability, that the institution itself might be undermined by admitting such vulnerability. Others, however, recognized that the situation had reached a point where honesty might actually restore some of the credibility that had been eroding during weeks of silence and speculation. The debate was intense, but Charles had made his position clear, and as monarch, his word was final. What emerged from this crisis unexpectedly was a strengthening of the relationship between Charles and William. The tension that had existed between them for weeks, fueled by grief, fear, and fundamentally different instincts about how to handle the situation, began to dissolve. William, who had been skeptical of his father's initially cautious approach, now saw a different side of Charles. He saw a man willing to break with tradition, to prioritize human dignity over institutional preservation, to take a stand that might cost him political capital within the palace establishment. For the first time in weeks, father and son found themselves aligned in purpose. They began working closely together, reviewing draft statements, discussing how to communicate the truth without sensationalizing it, preparing to speak not as sovereign and heir, but as men whose family had been profoundly affected by circumstances beyond their control. Behind closed doors, they rehearsed what would become one of the most emotionally charged announcements in modern royal history. Every word was carefully considered, every pause deliberate. They understood that they were about to shatter the carefully maintained image of royal invincibility, and they wanted to ensure that the truth was delivered with appropriate gravity and respect. But even as these preparations were underway, another layer of the story was emerging, one that would prove even more disturbing than the current crisis. The truth was that Catherine's condition had not suddenly appeared out of nowhere. There had been warning signs, symptoms that had been noted and documented, decisions that had been made to downplay or ignore what was happening. The cancer that was now threatening her life had not begun this year. It had been developing for months, and there were people within the palace establishment who had known, or at least suspected, that something was seriously wrong. According to confidential medical records and testimony from insiders, irregularities had been detected during routine health screenings late in 2023. These were not definitive results, and initial assessments suggested they might be inconclusive or unrelated to anything serious. But further testing in December had raised additional concerns. The results were worrying enough that medical staff recommended additional monitoring and possibly more invasive diagnostic procedures. However, these recommendations existed in a complicated context. King Charles himself was dealing with health issues, and there was considerable anxiety within the palace about how multiple royal health crises might be perceived by the public. During this period, Catherine was already experiencing symptoms that should have prompted more aggressive investigation. She was noticeably thinner, more frequently fatigued, and dealing with pain that she rarely discussed with anyone outside her immediate circle. Despite medical advice to reduce her schedule and focus on her health, Catherine continued to maintain a full roster of royal duties. She attended events, hosted meetings, and continued her work on early childhood initiatives. To the outside world, she appeared as committed and energetic as ever. But those closest to her knew that she was struggling, that every public appearance required tremendous effort, that she was essentially powering through symptoms that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Close staff members later revealed that Catherine had collapsed on at least 2 occasions during this period. Once at a private charity dinner, and another time behind the scenes at a hospital visit. Both incidents were handled with extraordinary discretion. Guests at the charity dinner were told she had experienced a severe migraine and needed to rest. Security personnel moved quickly to remove her from view, and no photographs or reports of the incident ever surfaced publicly. The collapse at the hospital was even more carefully concealed, with staff sworn to secrecy and all records of the incident sealed. Prince William was aware of what was happening. He witnessed his wife's body weakening, watched her struggle to maintain her appetite, saw the toll that continuing her public duties was taking on her health. He begged her repeatedly to step back, to prioritize her health over her royal obligations, to allow doctors to conduct thorough investigations without the pressure of maintaining public appearances. But Catherine refused. She believed deeply in the work she was doing, and she worried that stepping back would raise questions and create exactly the kind of speculation and media frenzy that she wanted to avoid. "Let me work while I still can," she reportedly told William. "People need to see something steady." The decisions made during this critical period would later haunt everyone involved. Senior palace aides, already concerned about King Charles's health situation, argued that revealing Catherine's potential illness would create an untenable crisis for the monarchy. 2 senior royals facing serious health issues simultaneously would shatter the public's confidence in the institution's stability. It would raise uncomfortable questions about succession, about continuity, about the future of the monarchy itself. In the interest of maintaining public calm and institutional credibility, the decision was made to keep Catherine's situation private until there was more definitive information about what was actually wrong. Catherine herself agreed to this approach, at least initially. She was assured that her condition was likely caught early, that it was manageable, that treatment could begin discreetly without the glare of public attention. She trusted the medical team, trusted the palace advisors, and wanted to believe that she could handle this challenge the same way she had handled every other difficulty in her royal life, with grace, determination, and minimal disruption to her duties. But the cancer did not cooperate with anyone's timeline or preferences. It progressed quietly but aggressively, and by the time the palace was prepared to acknowledge the truth publicly, the situation had already escalated beyond what anyone had initially anticipated. Even individuals who were typically loyal to the palace establishment began questioning the ethics of the prolonged silence. Medical professionals voiced concerns about the delay in aggressive treatment. Some advisors expressed guilt about their role in recommending discretion over disclosure. But by the time these doubts were being openly discussed, the damage had already been done. The delay had allowed the cancer to advance, and Catherine's prognosis had become significantly more complicated as a result. The institution had gambled on silence, betting that the situation could be managed privately and resolved before public disclosure became necessary. That gamble had failed spectacularly. The moment that ultimately changed everything came not from the palace, not from carefully worded official statements, and not from the traditional machinery of royal communications. It came from Catherine herself, in a decision that shocked even those closest to her. Without consulting the standard protocols, without seeking approval from palace advisors, and without the usual layers of review that typically precede any royal announcement, Catherine made the choice to speak directly to the public. The video she recorded was filmed in the garden of Adelaide Cottage, a place where her children had played countless times, where family memories had been made during happier days. The setting was deliberately intimate, stripped of all royal formality, just Catherine sitting on a bench with the natural world around her. The video lasted just 94 seconds, but those seconds would fundamentally alter how millions of people viewed not just Catherine, but the entire institution of the British monarchy. There was no press secretary standing nearby, no team of communications experts reviewing every word, no attempt to soften the message or frame it in ways that would protect the palace's image. This was Catherine, alone, choosing to share her truth in her own words. Her voice carried a tremor that no amount of preparation could disguise, and her face, though calm, revealed someone who had looked directly into an uncertain future and decided that honesty was more important than maintaining comfortable illusions. She began by thanking people for their patience, their concern, and their continued support during her absence from public life. But it was what came next that took the breath away from everyone watching. She confirmed what so many had feared but hoped was not true. The surgery earlier in the year had revealed cancer, and she was now undergoing preventive chemotherapy. The words were stated simply without dramatic emphasis, but their impact was seismic. This was not palace spin or carefully managed disclosure. This was a woman acknowledging the reality of her situation with a directness that the royal family rarely permits. What made the video particularly powerful was not just what Catherine said, but how she said it. There was no attempt to minimize the seriousness of what she was facing, no false optimism designed to make viewers feel more comfortable. At the same time, she did not dwell on details of her diagnosis or treatment. Instead, she spoke about her family, about resilience, about the need for time and space to navigate this challenge. But for those who listened carefully, there were undertones beneath her measured words, a sense of someone preparing others for possibilities she could barely articulate herself, a quiet acknowledgement that the road ahead contained no guarantees. The reaction to the video was immediate and overwhelming in its intensity. Within minutes of its release, social media platforms across the globe were flooded with responses. The video was shared millions of times, translated into dozens of languages, and became the subject of analysis by everyone from body language experts to oncologists offering context about what preventive chemotherapy might entail. News organizations that had been covering the story of Catherine's absence suddenly shifted their entire approach, moving from speculation to respectful coverage of a genuine health crisis affecting a public figure who had earned widespread admiration. Hashtags supporting Catherine dominated trending topics worldwide. Public figures from every sphere, including presidents, prime ministers, actors, musicians, and athletes, issued statements expressing their support and wishing her strength during treatment. But perhaps most significantly, ordinary people felt compelled to respond. Strangers shared their own experiences with cancer, creating a global conversation about illness, vulnerability, and the human capacity to endure difficult circumstances. Candlelight vigils appeared spontaneously outside Kensington Palace and Windsor Castle. People who had never attended a royal event felt moved to show up, to light a candle, to stand in solidarity with someone they had never met, but felt connected to nonetheless. The gatherings outside the royal residences were notable for their quiet dignity. Unlike typical royal events, which often have a festive or celebratory atmosphere, these vigils were marked by hushed voices and visible emotion. Strangers embraced each other, shared tissues, and spoke in reverent tones about what Catherine represented to them. Many brought their children, explaining in age-appropriate terms why it was important to show support for someone going through a health crisis. The diversity of those who came was striking, spanning generations, backgrounds, and levels of previous engagement with royal affairs. This was no longer about monarchy as an institution. It had become about shared humanity and collective concern for someone who was suffering. Behind the scenes, the impact of Catherine's decision to speak directly was even more profound. Prince William had reportedly not been informed of the exact timing of her video announcement. He learned, along with much of the world, when the video went public. Later that same day, he attended a scheduled school engagement, and it was during that event that the full weight of the situation became visible. When a young student innocently asked how Catherine was doing, William paused, turned away from the cameras, and for the first time in his public life, openly wept in front of a crowd. The moment was captured by photographers present at the event, but in a remarkable show of restraint, most news organizations chose not to publish the images. Even journalists who had spent years pursuing any glimpse of royal vulnerability recognized that this was different. This was not news to be exploited. This was genuine heartbreak unfolding in real time. That moment of William's tears became symbolic of something larger than one man's grief. It represented the shattering of the carefully maintained barrier between royal duty and human emotion. For generations, members of the royal family had been trained to suppress personal feelings in public, to maintain composure regardless of circumstances, to project an image of strength that never wavered. But Catherine's illness and her decision to speak honestly about it had made that old approach impossible to maintain. The monarchy, whether it was ready or not, was being forced to show its human face. While the public focused on Catherine's bravery and the family's obvious pain, another conversation was taking place within the palace walls. Senior officials and advisors were grappling with unprecedented questions about the future. Catherine was not just a beloved public figure. She was the future queen consort, a central figure in the monarchy's long-term planning, and someone whose presence had become essential to the institution's public image. Her absence raised practical questions that no one wanted to ask, but could no longer avoid. Who would fulfill her royal duties if she could not return to public life? Who would take on the patronages she had built relationships with over years of dedicated work? Who would represent the modern, accessible face of the monarchy that she had come to embody? These were not merely administrative questions. They touched on deeper issues about the nature of the monarchy itself and its ability to adapt to circumstances that defied traditional protocols. Some individuals within the royal establishment saw Catherine's absence as an opportunity to reshape roles and responsibilities. Queen Camilla, who had spent years carefully building her own position within the royal family, reportedly expressed interest in taking on more visible ceremonial duties. Those in her circle argued that she had the experience and dignity necessary to step into a more prominent role during this transitional period. But this suggestion was met with immediate and forceful opposition from other senior royals. Princess Anne, whose relationship with Catherine was built on mutual respect and shared commitment to royal duty, intervened directly. She, along with Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, made it clear that any attempt to replace Catherine, even temporarily, would be viewed as both premature and deeply inappropriate. Princess Anne, known for her blunt communication style, reportedly told King Charles directly that rushing to fill Catherine's role would be interpreted as giving up on her recovery and would damage the monarchy's relationship with the public far more than any temporary absence ever could. The tensions within the family became increasingly visible to those paying attention. William, caught in the middle of institutional pressures and personal anguish, refused to participate in any discussions about contingency planning that treated Catherine's return as unlikely. He understood intellectually that the monarchy required continuity, that roles needed to be filled and duties needed to be performed. But emotionally, he could not accept the premise underlying these conversations, the suggestion that the family should prepare for a future without Catherine actively participating in royal life.